the last couple of years. Congratulations to all of us, I guess, on that, and thank you so much for being the flag bearer on that. Would love to hear about your perspective on, as from the policymaking side of things, how we're pushing the ideas of entrepreneurship forward.
So, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Uh, Let me start by saying that India is following a trajectory where we've tried increasingly in the last, particularly in the last 10 years under Prime Minister Modi, to invest heavily in our physical infrastructure and in our digital infrastructure as a way of propelling the growth momentum that you're currently seeing in the economy, which also has the additional advantages of a very young population and of many other important factors such as political stability, a strong leadership, and fairly robust macroeconomic numbers. Even coming out of the pandemic, when most other countries suffered quite badly, we did too, but we did not invest, spend money on freebies so much. We tried to use it to structurally transform our economy. Now, what this has done in many ways is it has created an environment where the public sector investment is crowding in and bringing in a lot of private sector investment as well. And particularly when you look at the digital space, where we've created a very large, of what we call an India stack, a very large, set of digital public infrastructure, which can be leveraged by the private sector as well, particularly by the startups, to create jobs, to get into business, and really, if they have a big idea, they really have, uh, the upside that exists in that country. Also have the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. Is we currently on DPIIT's website, we've recognized about 115,000 startups so far. Many of them have come out from rural areas, from tier 2 and tier 3 cities as well. And they are propelling a wave of innovation and dynamism when it comes to the Indian economy. 117 of them are unicorns now. And I mentioned the digital public infrastructure because one in five out of those unicorns is in the fintech space, which really takes advantage of the India stack that I mentioned. And we also have a lot of dynamism in other segments of the startup ecosystem, in not only in fintech but also in software as a service, in agri-tech, in e-commerce particularly, in a lot of other financial products as well. What it has really led to is a wave of new generation of entrepreneurs in the country, the topic of today's discussion. Mm-hmm. We have these new companies, many of them in the e-commerce space. Misho comes to mind, Nika comes to mind. There are lots of others who are in the logistics space, in agri-tech as well. And as I mentioned, a lot of them in the fintech space. So yes, we are seeing this transformation from traditional businesses into a lot of new age entrepreneurs coming in new areas, which are sunrise sectors of the economy. But that is all I'll say at the start. I want this to be a conversation. I want to hear from people here and also respond to any queries or questions they may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think I personally have quite a few questions to come back to you on that role of education and all of that, the way that the robust Indian education system has also given rise to such a fantastic startup ecosystem in our country. But before that, let's move on to a couple of the other panelists. I'd love to hear from you, Vaishali. So Vaishali Nigam Sinha, she's the co-founder of Renew and the chairperson of sustainability at Renew. And we're just chatting right before about campuses, about Indian education, and how inherently sustainability has always been a part of the Indian ethos. The way that we look at the world has always been steeped in what today we might be known as sustainability. So as somebody who runs is the founder of the largest renewables company in the country, what are your thoughts about that? Somebody who's, and also this is your 6th, 7th Davos, I guess?
After a couple, it doesn't matter.
After a couple, it doesn't matter.
It's all the same, but
So-
I guess I'm audible. So
No, we still take
okay.
the mic from. Yes.
All right.
I'd love to hear your opening remarks
Sure.
on that.
No, first of all, I want to say thank you to Invest India and the leadership. Okay. Hello, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, better.
And the visionary leadership shown by our country under our Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji's leadership to really encourage entrepreneurship in our country. And, it was long overdue. And to see the enabling policy environment, I think for an entrepreneur, it really means a lot. For an entrepreneur, it's really about, capital. First of all, it's about an idea. Then it's about the capital. It's about the enabling policy environment. And then it's about execution. When you bring all of this together, then magic happens. I want to say that as far as entrepreneurship is concerned in our country, it's really always been, because of the way entrepreneurship has evolved, around technology and IT and digital, as far as success is being measured. But more recently, it's really delightful to see how we've had successful entrepreneurs in the area of infrastructure, and ESG related business models such as ours.
Yeah.
So when we were looking to raise funds, which is about 13 years ago, the cost of clean energy was about 5-6 times more expensive than conventional. But I think an entrepreneur believes that when you think something is impossible, that's the right time to go and get things done. And what makes this impossibility a possibility is the enabling environment. So I just want to reiterate, really it's been, in earlier days, it used to be like the role of a government is to stay out of business. But in this case, the government has stayed out of business and yet provided an enabling environment. And that fine balance is really unique to India. And I think as an entrepreneur on behalf of many others, I'm sure you'll agree, it's been a great time to be an entrepreneur in India. We have a ESG sustainability model, and it's really not about what we do, which is generate clean energy. We believe our job is not done till we do this in the cleanest and the most sustainable way. And that is a priority. And I'm proud to say that because of the enabling environment, because of the regulatory environment and framework, we are one of the top rated ESG companies globally when it comes to rating indices and other frameworks like Sustainalytics, etc. I know I may not have answered your question on educational institutions.
We'll come back to that.
But I can come back to that. But all I want to say is very powerful for us to collaborate with educational institutions to do more, to find innovative solutions to problems we are facing, not only in India, but with global industry academia partnership, very much like, if I could say, the Stanford models where you have incubators. I think there's much to learn, much to partner, and I think the private sector can play a role. And perhaps even at the national level, the kind of leadership our government is showing with respect to facilitating this environment, I'm sure we can come up with really great partnerships to do more.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Vaishali. We come back again on this topic, but I love the point that it's been such a model, I think, that our country has created with the growth of entrepreneurs on campuses, young entrepreneurs, and awareness around entrepreneurship. It's almost the spirit, I think I spoke about this a little bit on the last panel as well, but we are at the end of the day the country that came up with Jugaad. We make do with what little is available, sometimes even with nothing at all. For those of you who don't know, actually the word Jugaad, which actually stands for frugal innovation, it comes from the concept of a car, which was not even a car. It was basically a platform with 4 wheels, which was used to transport people back in the day in villages of, in remote villages of India. And that sort of became the one defining factor for getting India onto the global map, that we are a country where the ecosystem or the spirit of innovation comes from deep within and is very much built into our ethos, I feel. So lovely hearing your points about that. I'll come to Yat on the next bit. I would have said, let's hear about your thoughts on the topic as an outsider, but I got into a big trouble with this last time when I called. We had a panelist from the Netherlands who was here, and I called her an outsider, and she said, I have been to India 8 times. And basically threatened me that if I called her an outsider, it would not go down very well for me. So we'll not do that. But yeah, before you give your opening remarks, I want to mention. So I'm married to a French girl, and was the director of sustainability at HEC Paris Business School actually. And it's not about that. On our family WhatsApp group, the day that we started Davos this year, but somebody from the family posted a photo saying, Google CEO India, Microsoft CEO India, and then like 100 other companies CEO India, with so many tech CEOs coming from India, like subtle takeover, just like a quiet little message on a family group early morning. It was interesting to see how all around the world people are recognizing the fact that we must be doing something right as a country. That so many of our entrepreneurs go in and take the top spot as CEOs of some of the biggest companies in the world. You have been such a trailblazer and been such an important part in the growth of the new age media, of everything to do with the metaverse, with Web3. And it would be amazing to hear from your perspective what India can do in its years of growth, in let's say in its decade of growth, to really propel ourselves forward, to disrupt what's happening in the world over. So yeah, opening remarks from you. Yeah.
Well, so thank you for the kind introduction. Yeah, maybe not outsider, maybe on this panel, a quasi-diversity index perhaps. But either way, I mean, it's a great honor and pleasure to be here. Just a little bit of history. Actually, we used to have an office in Chennai, actually. And also we've done many investments in India in Web3 and blockchain and gaming and actually health and fitness related companies. And to your earlier point, I mean, I think Indian, the Indian entrepreneurial export, as it were, has actually had major impact. If you think about the earliest days of the internet, like Hotmail, for instance, right? I mean, that's basically, I guess, an Indian entrepreneur. And you just look in the Valley, just look in the US, for instance. I mean, clearly there's a very, very strong Indian footprint. If you're around Mountain View, basically you can get. I'm not an expert at Indian food, but I think it's apparently really good.
We come to Indian food.
Yes,
but
just to point that it's very prolific over there for good reason. But no, I mean, Animoca Brands is a company that has been really focused on the notion of digital property rights. And this is basically what we think is the foundation of Web3. And really the idea of creating and reforming a new kind of internet. So the first internet was Web 1, which is the internet of read. The second one is read-write. But then what are you writing to? And that's basically the data paradigm. And in Web 3, actually, we as end users can now actually own essentially the data that's written to this Web 3. So we think of it as a natural iteration of the internet. And it's really a people-powered internet, as it truly was meant to be, away from the platforms. And when you look at today, the problem we have is that most countries are actually beholden on platform technologies that are actually not acting in their national interest. So I think the opportunity for countries around the world, and especially for places like India, is, I mean, I'm not saying that you need to have an Indian Facebook, but I'm just saying that there should be technology and businesses built around that really care about the national interest of the country that they're serving, which in the past has started to spread out because we started to sort of centralize ourselves around technology platforms that are actually sort of, really working in their corporate interest, but not really in the national interest in which they're operating in, right? I mean, at the end of the day, Facebook and Google are great organizations, but they're not acting in the interest of a national country, they're acting in the interest of the corporate profits. And I think this is what Web3 can change, because now the end users who live in those places have ownership and sovereign rights over it and can basically act in their national interest. And so we are sort of looking at that vision and future, and this is what we think Web3 is all about. We've done over 450 investments globally around the space to help enact that space. And it's now become, it's almost like a parallel universe, but it's a space that's, basically as an economy is almost $1.8 trillion in size. And, it's particularly effective in places that have traditionally been financially excluded. So there's economic opportunities that we see now in places like, some of our biggest operations are actually in Latin America and in Southeast Asia, and Philippines. And so Web3 in the metaverse has really empowered those communities and really basically financially included them. And I think that's one of the big opportunities for India. And it's also one of the reasons we've done so many investments in India as well. Most recently, for instance, with the Sandbox, with BharatBox, we basically launched, which is one of our subsidiaries, we launched a creator campaign enabling Indian creators to build products and services on the metaverse, but for a global audience. So it's not, right. Which also then has the impact for the export side, right? I mean, India has incredible export in terms of its culture in film and media, but not in digital, right? In the digital space, all your culture, be it Bollywood or the music or whatever, actually doesn't really exist digitally in the way that it could. and has really been more of a diaspora export as opposed to a global export. But I think there's huge potential for that, and I think the metaverse can deliver that.
Why do you think that is? Sorry, I was not supposed to come back to rebuttals on this stage as well, but always been a debater, so I have to come back. But why do you think we've not been able to properly export it and still exist as a diaspora thing globally?
Well, I mean, I think I see this a little bit from the lens from the Chinese as well as from the Korean perspective. I think it has to do with distribution.
Okay.
So meaning that the places that control distribution outlets are the ones who have become the tastemakers because they're platforms. In other words, if Netflix doesn't recommend, Bollywood content, then you won't see it. And if Spotify doesn't recommend, Indian music, you won't see it.
So it's kind of a gatekeeper thing almost.
Platforms are gatekeepers.
Yeah.
The reality is that in Web 2, we don't exist with our own rights. Just think about it. We're rentiers. And the challenge we have is every time when someone listens to content or is a content creator, they pay a fee to the platform just for the right to be there.
Yeah.
And on top of it, they can remove you. And so that means that there are central platforms who are not acting in the national interest, who are basically controlling what we like and what we don't like. So you go on Spotify and maybe you see Taylor Swift and she's nice, but all this other content we don't know how to discover and how to find, right? And I think this is what Web3 changes, because with metaverse, with NFTs, you actually have the ability to reach customers directly. It breaks the whole model. And I think this is why I think content like this will sort of can elaborate. And what Korea has been really good into the export of K-pop and K-culture is they were a very digital first nation, if you remember.
Right.
The country was in turmoil. First thing they did was build broadband. It was like, why would you do broadband? But anyway, they created a huge digital culture, the digital export, and the fact that they owned and controlled these gaming platforms that obviously took over the world is actually how Korean culture expanded throughout the world. And I think that this is possible as well. But think of the history of India. Originally, Indian technology history, so I'm dating myself, it was very much sort of in the SI side. So you're developing for others.
Right.
But I think in this age, you can develop for yourself. And
yeah.
Exactly.
In the best case scenario, in a Web3 world, this would have been an unmoderated panel, because all of them would have been able to talk about it from their perspectives without having a gatekeeper. Sorry for being the gatekeeper for today's session, ladies and gentlemen, but we will move on to the next bit. And I would love to get back to the topic of indigenous gaming a little bit with you yet when we come back to you. The next speaker that we have with us, Zubaida. So she's a social entrepreneur, and she's the president and CEO of the Grameen Foundation. As an Indian American, growing up in Chennai, and now obviously based out of Colorado, I think you mentioned. What has it been like? What has your journey been like? If you could tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Grameen Foundation, and I come back to you for rebuttals.
For sure. I grew up in Chennai, did my engineering there, and then went abroad to do my master's. When I came back, I kind of was in a space where I was working with agriculture and healthcare, and ended up becoming an entrepreneur. Came back to the US to do an MBA. And really, as an entrepreneur, a lot of the work that I did in healthcare, especially with women's health, was around transforming systems for the company to be successful. So after being an entrepreneur for 13 years, when I stepped down, I got invited by a few large global nonprofits, because systems transformation is a key aspect of any program to be successful. And at Grameen, we are all about transforming systems for women, right? And when we talk about entrepreneurship, for programs like what Government of India is implementing under our esteemed Prime Minister, it's about, our role is about taking informal entrepreneurs and bringing them to the formal economy so that they can grow and scale, and digitizing them and giving them access to capital, right? We have what we call the entrepreneurship scouts, where we send scouts into the community to actually identify progressive women entrepreneurs who are then, we recruit them, we train them, we enable them to register their business, file taxes, we introduce them to financial inclusion, digital economy, and all of a sudden they go doubling their income, because now they've been identified as somebody who can play a part in the formal economy. We also do this with smallholder farmers. Again, in India, we don't see smallholder farmers being women. So really including them into the farmer producer organizations, which has been a huge initiative of Government of India. How do you engage women to be core members of farmer producer organizations? How do you teach them to create value add of their produce? One of the examples there is, women farmers, they didn't have much to cultivate. Their plots of land were really small. So we ended up bringing in a new variety. We trained them to grow chamomile, small women self-help groups, and we created the whole supply chain for them to cultivate chamomile and convert that into chamomile tea, which is now being sold at the markets. So again, our role as Grameen Foundation is really financial inclusion, but bringing informal entrepreneurs into the formal economy and with a very specific focus on women. And just to reiterate that with statistics, I think about 14% of entrepreneurs in India are women, right? And about 20% of them are the ones which is less than 3%, are the ones that play in the global economy. So how do you create that pipeline for programs and projects that governments are implementing to be successful at scale is the role that we play at the last mile. Again, we are a global nonprofit, and India is one of our main offices.
Amazing. I would love to come back to you and hear a little bit more about your personal vision of facilitating that push for more women entrepreneurs in India, and also the fact that you're a maternal health champion by Ashoka. So what can essentially organizations like Ashoka do to promote entrepreneurship on a global scale? I would love to hear that from you. But just to catch on to something that you said before, you started with you're an engineer. And in India, we joke about this sometimes. At first, you become an engineer, then you kind of figure out what you want to do with your life. So, case in point, thank you very much for...
Engineers are problem solvers.
That is why.
Right? And we solve large problems
I
in
mean,
the
sure.
world.
I'm also an engineer. Terrible one. Don't know why I wanted to become a computer science engineer. But hey, here we are. And we can... Last day's session, we had 3 lawyers on the panel. This time, I don't know if you have any lawyers. Oh, there we have. Always. Oh, show of hand for engineers. So next time, we'll only do sector-specific panels. We have the biggest lawyers in the audience, yes. So yeah, Ms. Nishit Desai was on that panel that we're talking about, where we were talking about lawyers. But we come to Chetan. So Chetan Baragar, he's playing a crucial role at Recycle, one of the founders of Recycle. And I want your opening remarks, but I also want to hear about your vision for social entrepreneurship in a country, especially from this year's theme of Davos at World Economic Forum, where everything's about AI. We're talking about AI and longevity as well, but maybe let's keep that aside for a bit right now. Your thoughts on how AI is really disrupting the world and how it will maybe disrupt the space of social entrepreneurship itself. So over to you, Chetan.
So when we talk of India, we talk of scale. We talk of different states, the population, and that can only be done through an AI, right? But before I come to AI, on this year's theme, it's about building trust. And I would connect that to building trust about entrepreneurship in India as well. Entrepreneurship, as the perspective towards entrepreneurship has changed so much, thanks to all the effort that has been put in by DPIIT, Startup India, Invest India. So much of awareness that you mentioned engineers. Previously, the golden path was you become an engineer and you join Infosys or you join Seven, then your family feels that you're settled.
At least.
Someone rogue in the family would then start a venture. And if he succeeds, there would be few in the family. But if he doesn't, then for the entire generation, nobody in the family will talk about entrepreneurship. That has certainly changed. And in a segment like ours as well, I mean, you would also relate to that. Waste and technology were never thought in the same sentence. When we started 6 years ago as well, we were questioned on who will adopt tech in waste. It's all informal segment. They're not educated. They don't have mobile phones. How will you give them access? And look how this is a perfect example of being at the right time in the right place, which is India for entrepreneurship today. The kind of internet penetration that we have, the kind of mobile penetration that we have had, and the excellent payment infrastructure that has been built. There was a behavioral change example that I would like to quote from Kedarnath that we were able to achieve. 10 lakh units of plastic has been channelized from the snow-clad mountains of Kedarnath to recycling. And that was done through public participation, partnership. We were able to, deposit refund system is fairly popular in Europe, implemented in many provinces. We implemented something similar in Kedarnath, where a 10 rupee deposit was levied on anything that is sold in plastic in the region. Immediately, there was a 40% pickup on the collection side. The littering had reduced. And as soon as the news spread in the town, there was a scavenger hunt for plastic. If you collected 10 units of plastic, it took care of your field for that day. And that's how we reached the number of 10 lakh units. That was done in just 3 months.
Excellent.
How do you refund that? Earlier, it used to be cash dependent, right? How do you carry so much of cash and maintain it? UPI made it possible for us. You could scan the bottle, it was tracked that this is authentic, and you could pay the money back directly to their bank accounts. That innovation, few years back, deposit refund system has been there for years, right? But we could have, we were able to do it on a digital level only because of the framework that is present. Taking that further, this is the littering part of the problem. Where AI comes in is at the source segregation part. Today, massive scale campaigns are done, advertising is done to make people aware about segregation. With AI, we were able to identify which household is segregating the waste with codes placed on the doors, and what is the level of segregation to incentivize or penalize them based on that. And we could do it at scale. Next, we come to processing. At the processing, with Smart Vision and a partnership with Google Circular Net, we were able to scan what kind of material is coming into the processing center. And that on that day, input was available for recyclers to know what volume of plastic is available. So that was made possible through AI. We talk about inclusion. That again was made possible through AI. Which self-help group worker is coming in and working today, not. That was through facial recognition, we were able to identify. Whenever brands partner with us to for betterment of these classes, we were able to enable and bring in traceability in where the money flow has gone in. And that has been the biggest success of tech and AI, what I've seen. This is from our niche that I'm talking about.
Right. And of course, it makes sense. Even if you were at Davos last year, I think there was the India Sustainability Pavilion, where I don't remember, other than the SDG tent, if there was another pavilion by a country which was focused on the idea of sustainability. The fact that today we have so many speakers on the panel who have built successful businesses in the social and entrepreneurship space in and around sustainability. Of course, there's so many good things that the Indian policy making side of things has contributed to that. So I think we really must applaud the work the incredible work that has gone into creating that policy framework, and so that we as entrepreneurs can really build onto that and build products for the world itself. So we'll come back to that. I would love to come back to you on the scalability that you mentioned about taking these products globally and using AI to rapidly scale that as well. But sir, we come back to you for the second bit. First, any of the points, if you would like to pick up on from any of our fellow panelists, if you could have the mic, please. Thank you. If you'd like to pick up on them, and I would love to hear your thoughts more on how the fintech revolution in India has also propagated its era of growth. We mentioned UPI. Maybe for those who are less aware in the audience, if you could get into a bit more on that and how it really helps you from the policymaking side of things.
Yeah, sure. So before that, it's a little difficult to sort of respond in terms of what more we need to do, because you're not giving me any feedback on what I need to do. You seem perfectly satisfied with government policies and with the facilitative environment. Let me tell you, I'm very open. I know there's a lot of things, a lot of unfinished agenda out there, and please do give me that, some unfinished tasks as well at the end of this feedback session. Yeah, so fintech and the India stack and what it has done for India's payments revolution, and in turn how it has generated so much of dynamism in the startup ecosystem as well, are things that I mentioned earlier. For Indians are fully aware, but for those from other countries who are present here, India has this the world's largest biometric ID system now. Thankfully, we don't have the privacy issues, etc., that were raised at one time have been kind of resolved satisfactorily by the highest court of the land. So we have a complete almost 1.2 billion people with biometric IDs with a unique ID. That is combined with various other data layers to ensure that you have a system whereby through what we call a united payment interface, we are able to essentially provide real-time digital payments faster than most other countries. In fact, right now, I think 46% of the world's real-time digital payment transactions take place in India because of that UPI, which creates a network where all private players, as well as public sector banks, RBI, everybody can get onto the same network and transact, use it with privacy enablement, as well as with complete security due to the linkage with the biometric ID that I mentioned earlier. So that has spawned this payment revolution in India. It has also created a fintech revolution in many ways. But I mean, that's one part of the equation. The bigger part, in my view, or equally important part, is that this is one example of what this digital public infrastructure at a population scale can do. The other part of it is, of course, in terms of actually providing online delivery of different kinds of citizen services, in terms of providing, direct benefit transfer payments. Our farmers all get a certain amount of money every year in 2 half-yearly installments. All of that is released directly to their bank accounts. So obviously, it cuts down, intermediation. It reduces, it makes it very, very transparent, and that system is already being utilized or leveraged to provide all kinds of other online services. Most states in India now provide services from birth to death online. I mean, whether it's your birth certificate or your death certificate, it's your land records, it's your water and electricity connections. All of these are increasingly provided online. And I would venture to say that we are probably ahead of most of Europe in this area. But yeah, I mean, that's the kind of ecosystem, digital ecosystem that India has achieved. As a result of it, our the contribution of the digital economy to India is, is enormous. It's growing very, very rapidly. So yeah, these are the kind of things that have happened. But as I said earlier, I do look for feedback on areas where we need to do more. Sure.
Absolutely. And with leaders like him, I think this makes the job of us entrepreneurs a lot easier, right? He's saying, "Give me problems, let me solve." Essentially, that's the kind of narrative we need. That is itself entrepreneurship. Right? I think thank you very much, sir, for providing that space for us and providing that loop feedback mechanism for entrepreneurs to grow in the country. For all those who are unaware, UPI obviously has completely taken over the world of financial transactions by storm, and there even exists something called UPI Lite now, where you can have transactions without being connected to the internet. If you think about it, what M-Pesa, for example, did for Africa as a country, this is perhaps the very next level of that. How can seamless transactions happen on financial matters for people who are out there selling, even fruits for a couple of cents on the streets of India. And that truly is what takes India's entrepreneurial quotient global. It's not just the unicorns. It's not just the 117 unicorns that are flag bearers of entrepreneurship in our country, but it's every single young little entrepreneur, the mom and pop stores, which are able to truly digitize their businesses using platforms like the UPI in India, which takes India's entrepreneurship forward. So I think as an Indian, I feel very proud of talking about this. I'm sure all our fellow panelists would agree. Would be coming back to Vaishali on this. I was just thinking, with the rise of conscious consumerism, how do you think Indian entrepreneurs like yourself can align with businesses, with global expectations of businesses, especially in terms of sustainability and ethics? If these were the 2 points you had to focus on, you're obviously a global leader and representing India in a platform like Davos year on year. What do you think? How can we align on that space, and maybe finish off your statement with how your organization also aligns with that. I mean, you were telling me a little bit about all the 170 sites where you're currently present in terms of infrastructure. What are the work that you've been doing in the space that aligns with the global vision?
So, we are, kind of a B2G, B2B business. And which means that we work with institutions, not necessarily with consumers. We're not working at the retail level. But so one of the things we're doing is we are actually, so if we could sort of elevate that from individuals to institutions, one of the, partnerships we have is with global companies like Microsoft, Amazon, etc., where we are helping them decarbonize their supply chains and sensitizing them to the use of renewables and helping them with that is what we're doing. And honestly, I don't think it is, there is a huge amount of demand for this. So it's coming very easily to us. I don't think we have to convince anybody. I think we are living in a world where the ecosystem is fertile for adopting sustainable practices. And why are we doing this? We are doing this because investors are asking for it, regulators are making it a requirement, and so the ecosystem, I don't think it's an option anymore. So to answer your question briefly, I think we've come a long way. I think over the last decade, we have seen accelerated progress with respect to, I guess, mitigation-related activities, which really, which is good, but it's not enough, as we all know, to meet our 2030 goals. So a lot more needs to be done. And sir, I would like to kind of come to you and say that while, we are speaking in superlatives because honestly, India has really shown the way. I was on a panel this morning, which was organized by the Columbia Global Energy Policy, CGEP, where we had representatives from different parts of the world, UK, and the US as well. And they were all talking about how can we keep politics out of the sort of climate journeys and initiatives in their countries. And when I was reflecting on our country, it's just been one area where I think in the parliament, there has been absolutely no disruption when it comes to either entrepreneurship or climate related initiatives which the government is taking. So I think it's been a very thoughtful strategy, and it has been a very impactful strategy, and I understand from a survey which was done by one of the educational platforms that now we see a reverse with respect to students who are going and studying in, in international universities, that most of them are deciding to come back to India, and they see that as an opportunity to come back and start their own ventures as opposed to working for multinationals. So I think these are all great actions, but the timely intervention of the government, the open-mindedness of a ministry such as yours, where businesses can come and present problems, and there is an open listening forum, I think provides us with a responsive action on the policy front, not 100%, but mostly where it's possible. I think we are a bunch of hopeful entrepreneurs. So, but I think the industry doesn't hesitate to come and engage, and we are grateful that the ministries are engaging with us. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but the specific issues come, I guess, to all of you, on a daily basis with respect to what needs to be done, because I think there's a long list of things which need to be done, and that's because there are a long list of responsive action which the government is taking. So let me give you an example. Post China plus one sort of a world which we are now all a part of, there have been a lot of issues and a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs in India. And with the PLI schemes, etc., we see huge amounts of opportunities in the supply chain for entrepreneurs to come in and really do what was being done in another country. And it's a bottomless sort of a pit, if I could say, because we need to find solutions. We have issues with respect to not being able to do business, with respect to manufacturing as well. And it would be your intervention, sir, and of the government and the policies which will make it possible for entrepreneurs to leapfrog and make sure that we can come up within, inward and yet sort of self-sufficient business models to be able to replace what was being done from other imports, which are now not possible.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Vaishali. So would you like to respond to that, or with your thoughts? I think.
Not really. I mean, since you mentioned the PLI scheme, that is perhaps another source of new entrepreneurship in a way, because it has created the sort of ecosystem where people are able to invest in various kinds of contract manufacturing initiatives in India, and we've started growing some national champions in many of these PLI sectors, which are 14 in number in the country so far. So yeah, that's moving, and but of course, as I said earlier, either doing business issues are always there. One, I remember, I mean, just because we are talking about startups in particular, some time back I realized that we have this income tax provision which says essentially that for 3 years, if a startup makes profits, it's entitled to an exemption. But we found that the numbers which were qualifying was really abysmal. It's not even 1% of the people who qualified were able to sort of perhaps provide the paperwork, etc., or that people were just simply being too conservative in terms of handling those applications. We've that came to our notice, and we've now sort of only in the last week sort of given that income tax exemption status to another 3,000 odd startups which are making profit. So yeah, I mean, interventions are always required in government, and that's why I say we should engage to ensure that whatever facilitation we are trying to do is actually reaching the entrepreneurs who are coming in with big ideas and trying to create employment in the country.
Thank you so much. We come back to Yat now on something which I think is a commonality between where you grew up and I grew up. And I promise I will not send a live stream link to your mom for this at all. But we say this in India as well, that it has traditionally always been that the last person to leave the office is the most hardworking. But now, in a post-COVID world where remote work has become almost the norm in most places, how does it work in your field? For example, you're working so many of your portfolio companies are probably truly digital. Most of the people working there are digital nomads. They probably have never, they're early 20s. They probably never even seen the inside of an office. And yet we are talking about the need for maybe some kind of structure in order to build a truly credible organization. How does it work in your world? And what could essentially traditional businesses learn from entrepreneurs who are truly disruptive in everything, including the way that they work? So how does the future of work look like from your perspective?
Well, I mean, I don't want to make a sweeping statement in terms of, but just from the lens of our experiences and our industries, what's very clear is that there's generational shifts and differences that happen in organizations in very compressed ways, meaning that it used to be that you could work and have a style of working and collaboration that was similar within, let's say, decades. As in, my parents did the same job that I did, or like there's a commonality, there's an understanding between each other that spans at least 15 years, 20 years as the classical idea of a generation. Are you Gen Z, are you millennial? And then you put that into a bucket. Well, that's not true anymore, right? Because of Moore's law, because of the rate of change of technology, because of the way that we engage, I would argue that generations are compressed literally in years.
Yeah.
So, we can no longer say that the social and the working expectations and environments of a 25-year-old is even comparable to a 30-year-old, right? I mean, so which means that when you think about this organizationally, or even as a family, your family is not one generation. Your family is probably, if you have like maybe different kids, different ages, it's probably 5 generations, for instance, right? And if let's say your boss is 40, let's say, and you're like 25, you have very little commonality between them. So I think the very first thing that when we went, not just because of COVID, even before, in sort of remote office environment, it was building empathy and understanding on a generational level, because I think, and you talked about the Asian parents, I tiger parenting, and I think all of us here, at least in Asian countries, have some empathy towards that, out of love. So let me be clear, right? It's not because there was someone who wanted to sort of be malicious.
Tough love.
Yeah, tough love.
Yeah.
The intention was that because I know better, because that was my life, because that was my experience, I will tell you how to do things and so on. And the managerial approach in the past was similar. This is what I know. This is what I expect. But knowledge is no longer in the exclusive domain of whoever is in a senior position. It used to be that the manager knew more things. Maybe a manager has more wisdom, but he doesn't know more things anymore. Like in our environment, we hire young engineers, and they far outstrip in terms of talent, skill, capability than someone who's been in the field for 20, 30 years, because this person knows smart contracts. And the person who is managing him has never touched smart contracts before, right?
Yeah.
Might know how to manage people. So this idea of how we value knowledge and how knowledge is distributed is completely upside down.
Yeah.
So in terms of working, I would also add that the culture comes a little bit down to the individuals. So there's some people, I don't believe in the abolishment of an office, because I think people still need to have teamwork, come together. But there are some people who just love working better by themselves versus some who need to come together because people are social, but it's just how that's engaged. So I think rather than look at work from home or work in office, I think we just need to completely redraw the idea of what is a common working space of the future and how do we engage sort of multi-generational environments that are no longer split by the traditional 20-year idea of a generation, but literally more like a 3 to 4 year gap so that we can engage. I mean, look at AI. There's 20-somethings are going to be using AI as a standard tool versus people who are older are still not comfortable using AI or don't even know how to use ChatGPT or how to use LLM models. Right? That in itself already is a gap in itself.
Wow. And lot of things to sort of crystallize and analyze and look forward to in the days to come as we as entrepreneurs, we have to keep making the workplace evolve along with the times.
Yeah,
right?
and I think maybe one thing to add as well is I no longer think of we no longer in our industry think of the workplace as a place in a location per se, right? So for instance, we're in, I don't know how many countries, but it's very
How
common.
many countries?
I don't know even how many countries we're in, because we might hire, for instance, 5 or 6 people that are just working remotely in one place or the other, because talent is the hardest thing to find, right?
Yeah.
And in some ways, India is one of the greatest talent exports. But as we've heard, people are coming back to India, which is great. But there's also this talent that is overseas that you want to leverage. And I think it's no longer like for Chinese or Japanese companies in the past, it was they prefer to hire Chinese or they prefer to hire Japanese. I mean, that was kind of the culture because you were trying to be homogenous, but that's no longer true anymore. You can't operate in a global world where you're only basically recruiting and working people from your culture, because you have to be global from the outset. And I think that's very true as well. India is one of the largest diasporas in the world. An Indian who has been educated abroad has different perspectives that are super valuable for people in India. And for sure, there'll be cultural clashes just because of the fact that they were raised differently, even though they share a common thread. And I think these models, like I don't see any management books or any kind of management models that actually discuss that model, right? In terms of how do you deal with something that is, look, it's not top down, it's not, what is this, right? And so I think the tools that are out there facilitate, but I think we're still exploring that, especially in a post-COVID environment.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your views on that. Zubeda, I come back to you with, I'll maybe start with a little story. One of the most interesting interactions I've had at this year's Davos was with a 5-year-old Indian girl who grew up in Finland, was with her family, and you just met her as well? What? Amazing, right? And she was just, I think we were in the same lift or something, and she's like, yeah, I just did my first talk at Davos. I was like, what?
She had a business card.
She had a business card, right? And she was...
She asked me for mine, which is so interesting.
Yeah, so she's a legend. I'm already super inspired. And one of the things she mentioned, her work was around how do you reduce pay gaps in between the genders. And you were talking right now about how do you bring more women into the workforce. I mean, I think, first of all, you should recruit this girl as your brand ambassador for whatever you want to work on. She's already doing a great job.
She earned an op-ed in the Time magazine.
My God, yeah. She's like 5 years old, this girl. I don't remember her name, but just absolutely incredible energy. Changed the way that I was looking at Davos completely. But your thoughts on that? How do you think young people are going to shape the future? How do you think young women are going to shape the future of entrepreneurship? Let's maybe decouple this from the India conversation for a bit and talk more about it from a global perspective, and also the East versus West dialogue. He was just talking about diversity. You can't really have homogeneous teams anymore, which only understand one side of the problem. The same way across genders, across disciplines, across sectors, across countries, all kinds of diversity is important. How do you think your work will encompass all of these together in the same topic? I'd love to know that from you.
Got it. I think for us, it's very important to understand that until we bring men and women to the workforce at an equal pace, it's going to be very hard for an economy to succeed. And like I was saying, 14% of entrepreneurs in India are women. And globally, this is a phenomena. And the number states, I think it's pretty close to $27 trillion that the global GDP can make from a perspective of men and women being on the same page. And so we are losing $27 trillion that's at the table. We also understand that the pay gap between men and women is not equal, and it's a global phenomenon, right? So every time something happens in a family, someone falls sick, a woman has a child, the first person to step down is a woman, right? And so you see women falling, as much as you see women joining the workforce, you also see women walking out of the workforce at the equal pace. So what can we do, sir? I think, we have an honorable panelist here. What can we do to actually bring women more into entrepreneurship? 70% of our country is employed by tech, but only 30% of that is women, right? So how do you do that? And I'm not saying that this is just an Indian phenomena. This is a global phenomena, and I see this even in the US. So really for us at Grameen, it has been very important at a 70-30 ratio. So we work with 70% women, 30% men. We really want to bring these women into the formal economy. We want to make sure that they understand what care means. We dismantle gender bias and power between them, the financial institutions, their families, between their husbands. So a lot of systems change work that I was talking about is in terms of how do you enable these women to step into the formal economy? How do you ensure that they stay in the formal economy, and how do they become successful entrepreneurs? So that's a huge wave of the work we do. Just to give you a story here, I remember being in Varanasi and meeting this one particular woman who was really happy with our work, because she said, for 15 years I was married. My husband didn't even bother to ask for my name until I became somebody who could step out and earn money and come back and gain my respect in my own family with somebody I was married to. This is not very far off, right? Like, how can you imagine a woman not having a voice and being invisible? Going back to, really where we are. And again, I'm talking about an Indian author here, Deepa Narayan, who wrote a book called Chup, right, which means silence in English, which is all about how do we, in the Indian society, by default, silence women in a way and look at her beyond her. She's kind of invisible in the system. How do you enable men to understand that this silence and invisibility prevails, and how do you help them step out of that? So this is more about the male members in this conversations. Like, you have to understand that you have certain unconscious bias that you're culturally holding against women, and how does that work against your own success, your own family's financial success, and how do you step out of that? So I think we have a lot of work to do. Yes, we are doing amazing in terms of digital inclusion, entrepreneurship, creating unicorns, but we have about half the country's population really struggling from a perspective of, we want to be seen and we want to be successful, and we want everybody to support us to make that happen. And that's Grameen's role, not just in India, but globally.
Incredibly powerful stories, I think, coming in. And that's when you realize that doesn't matter where you're coming from. It's not the East versus West conversation anymore. There are certain problems that continue to be problems in large parts of the world still. And I think maybe in parts of the East, it's just a bit more prevalent because we say, aise hi hota hai, and there's also I think the idea of log kya kahenge. I think there's also this idea that because traditionally maybe not that many women have been part of the workforce or have contributed to the financial success of a family, they've just been looked at like transparent. I really, that was a hard-hitting moment to think about it, that 15 years a man did not know the woman, his wife's name, because they did not think of them as an active entity in the family structure, perhaps. And maybe these are things that we have to, as the next generations, work towards meaningfully and consciously to change the narrative of the country going forward and come back stronger. Yes, please, absolutely.
points around women and entrepreneurship. A couple of points here, sir, and perhaps maybe you could make a note of these. One is that you talk about 17% women entrepreneurs, but if you look at the value of the entrepreneurial ventures, it's a fraction. So perhaps, sir, if we can have more funding for women-led businesses in our country, and I know there are a lot of very some friendly schemes for women entrepreneurs, but perhaps an area we can do more. I think the other area where we can do a little bit more is around the depth of financing. A lot of the financing for entrepreneurial ventures in India comes from external sources. So perhaps maybe more depth will help us have a more stable financial capital, access to capital, which is quite important for an entrepreneur. So I'm just trying to give you a couple of points to take away, but yeah.
So let me just make a couple of quick points about this. I mean, you're absolutely right. Labor force participation rate among women in India, I'm told, is roughly the same as Saudi Arabia, which is quite remarkable, and obviously it should be unacceptable. The areas where I've seen real traction here, including financial inclusion, is with these women self-help groups. The state where I used to work, Kerala, has this very powerful movement of women called Kudumbashri that has spawned off similar movements in other parts of India, including in areas like Bihar. And let me tell you, when it comes to these women self-help groups, the conventional banking system, the bank managers are more than willing to lend to these micro enterprises led by these women because their default rate is so low. It's they are a very good credit risk for them. So yeah, I mean those kind of areas we are seeing green shoots so to speak. In the startup area as well, the data that I've seen indicates that almost 42% of the startups in India have women, at least one woman as a director, which again shows that in that category of educated upper middle class, there is a fairly significant level of entrepreneurship from among women as well. Also, as a final note, let me say that earlier in the day, I was along with Madam Smriti Irani, our Minister for Women and Child Development. We had this meeting with a lot of venture capital representatives who are in Davos, precisely talking about this issue of how to ensure that funding is made available to women entrepreneurs in a way that is convenient and hassle-free. And she's about to launch a major initiative in this direction, along with our industry association, CII, and with the support of DPIIT as well. So yeah, I mean, I think this is something that we really need to work on, but I do feel that there are some interesting ideas that have already worked in India, and I'm sure we can do many more.
We look forward to seeing how initiatives of the government itself, led by the Honorable Minister of Women and Child Development, Ms. Irani, how it would leapfrog the country's workforce forward, especially its women. There was a very interesting statistic I read that if you look at some of the most successful women and look at their ages, it's almost always older women. And you would see that the most successful men globally would be in their late 30s, early 40s, but for women, it's a bit later. The 50-plus women have been seen to be at their peak when it comes to how successful they are. And to a large extent, of course, it's the way that women's bodies also function. Right? To a large, I mean,
it's just confidence, right? I mean, it's just the whole thing about, there's this very interesting story in Lenin where Sheryl Sandberg, who's quite a successful woman, says that both she and her brother went to Harvard, and her brother was 2 years junior to her, but they happened to be in the same class. And before an exam, when they went in, she'd slogged a few weeks just studying for it, and he just came in and said, "Oh, well, I just studied overnight." And he was so confident, while she topped the class, and he got an average grade, but the confidence with which he was coming in. And I think that's what gets them to jump in earlier, perhaps. Women want more security and comfort before they take these decisions. And perhaps, of course,
also to a certain extent, but
Just
when
to
they come
add
back
to the conversation, I think that is a biased statement. I'm sorry, I just have to disagree there because I think the way the education system works, right? Like, yes, I'll 100% agree that men are more confident. So when you take tests that you have to choose one of the 4 multiple answers, men do amazingly well and women don't, because men are good at guesstimating and with confidence they do, but women just don't respond. And so even the way we bring women into the formal education, a lot of women drop out of STEM in the US, primarily because there are certain levels of crossing education where they don't. Where they're not able to represent that confidence. However, I think the trend is changing now. You see a lot of younger women with much more confidence. And again, going back to the book by Deepa Narayan Chip, she says, we brought women 2 decades ahead, but we left the men behind, and that's why women are not successful. So the appeal is again back to the men. We have done a lot in bringing the confidence in women to get them to where they need to be. But unfortunately, as a society, we left the men 2 decades behind. And it's really important for them to step up and understand the game and be there with them and support them. And that's where I think we need to change it. So the confidence, it's there. It's just that we're made to believe it isn't. And at some point, that narrative needs to shift.
We need the allies.
Of
We
course.
need the allies, of course. And I think when we were planning for this session, I did not really think that we would get into this direction, talking about entrepreneurship. But at the end of the day, there are some human ideals which will always remain relevant, right? It's not about how do we create the next big platform for providing entrepreneurship, but it's about the individuals as well. Human beings can only react to stories of individuals. We don't recognize in our heads the way, we can't relate as much to organizations as the way that we can relate to individuals. And at the end of the day, who are we working for? We're working for people. At the end of the day, we are servicing, no matter what industry we're in, what sector we're in, we are servicing people. And if we don't have empathy towards the people around us, how do we hope to get better at our work? So great, we do have one last closing remark from you, and I would love to hear about the Samudra Manthan initiative that you all launched. And I found it very interesting. The name itself, obviously derives from a mythological event that happened. So for those in the audience who do not know it, maybe in very short, what Samudra Manthan means and what it means for you at your organization, and then we can close.
So quite literal translation is ocean churn. Through our marketplace, what we have done is we've channelized close to 0.5 million metric tons of waste in the last financial year, out of which 75,000 metric tons was ocean-bound plastic. So, and as soon as you think about ocean-bound plastic, you think about beach cleanups, you think about dives and collection of plastic. What you have to realize is the problem of ocean plastic isn't in the ocean, it is on the land, where we generate the plastic. And at source, if you are able to remove plastic away from the streams that it reaches water bodies and reaches the lanes, that's when the real Samudra Manthan happens. And that's how we were able to do it. We were able to channelize plastic from 32 out of the 60 coastal districts, and overall, including the districts around river bodies, where majority of our rivers are, majority of our cities are based. About 232 districts is from where we channelize the plastic. It is world's largest ocean plastic channelization that has been done so far. Your ocean plastic drives are generally limited to one location, a beach, a stretch of land as such. But by driving micro-entrepreneurship at the local level, empowering women, the fishermen, when they go into for collecting their catch, come back with 15% of their weight of plastic filled with bottles. Their catch percentage and the weight has gone down. Women, the wives who, after the morning session where they sell it off, have time in the afternoon, creating those groups where they were able to segregate, separate those wastes as well, the fishing nets as well, has brought in more and more of nylon 6/6 sort of a plastic, which is non-recyclable, but we were able to recollect it from them and get it recycled. So that's Samudra Manthan for you. The volume itself speaks that it is possible without having expenditure on large machines going into the oceans and collecting small volumes of plastic.
Excellent. I think that sort of brings us to the end of the time for today. Thank you so much, everybody, for being such a patient audience. I'd like to thank all our lovely panelists as well. for bringing out the true, authentic selves that you probably came to Davos with, not just to represent the organizations that you're from, but to represent humanity and the best of humanity that we always see. This is why I personally come to Davos. I love these conversations that we get to have without any filters and just bringing out ourselves. I am going to leave this session with a lot more questions than I had. Hopefully a little bit of food for thought for a lot of us sitting here as well. This has been an absolute pleasure moderating this session and hosting you all for the Rise of New Age India, a series of panel discussions organized by Invest India, EDGE, and the PhD Chamber of Commerce at the India Engagement Center. Unfortunately, we will not be able to take any more questions from the audience today, but if the speakers are around and if they're kind enough to be answering the questions one-on-one, please stick around, have a cup of chai, and enjoy the rest of your time in Davos. Please stay warm, and I'll see you all very soon. This is Meghdut Chaudhary signing off. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It would be a pleasure.